Thank you. Thanks so much for the kind introduction and invitation. I really like to thank organizers for inviting me to give this keynote talk. And in particular, I know that for many of you, this is an early time of the day. So extra thanks for that. It's, of course, a great honor. And I would like to, it would be wonderful to be there in person. But I think this kind of online conference is a great option and eco-friendly model too. I don't see where all people come from, but it's exciting to know that people are coming from so many countries and joining from so many time zones. So my plan really today is to approach the our theme, the theme of the conference, methodologies for the use of history and philosophy through pragmatism, as Maria just told, and more specifically through my own development of it, which I have called, perhaps fittingly for the conference today, methodologism. And after that, I'll try to apply these lessons to the long-standing question of how to integrate history and philosophy of science, or HPS in short. So my talk has three roughly equal parts. It's about 20 minutes. So first, there is the contents. So first, I will introduce methodologism, asking what is it and why to talk about methods in the first place. And this is the most abstract and the most purely philosophical part of the talk. Second, and then I'll turn to some recent and also a little older literature on the integration of history and philosophy of science. And we'll notice there that metaphors of marriage and relationship play a surprisingly prominent role in that discussion. So I will ask, what's the state of this marriage today? Should it be filing for divorce, for example? The third and the final part offers kind of pragmatist therapy for HPS, an attempt to find a genuine common ground between history and philosophy. Okay, so without further ado, I'll begin the first part of my talk. And so this is the cover of the book, my version of pragmatism, methodologism, and indeed it will be out in January or February. And it provides both a philosophical framework of for HPS and a shared approach to science itself. Well, that's my approach today. I'm trying to convince you of that. And so I argue how history can be relevant to philosophy and philosophy in turn to history, going through the idea of methodologism. And so now let's begin this therapy session in earnest and with a look at some basic tenets of this pragmatism called methodologism. So what is it and why talk about methods? So I'll actually start with a picture that will be familiar to almost everyone, not necessarily this picture too, but more like a philosophical idea. And that's the true conditional and representational tradition in philosophy. So in its simplest form, it says that language stands in a representational relation to the world. It's a relation that can be formally captured as a satisfaction relation between linguistic expressions and reality. So we get things right when terms refer to entities, predicates to properties, verbs to actions, and when we portray the relations among these as they are in the external world. As Richard Rorty famously put it, in this conception, knowing is mirroring, if not literary, forming a mirror image, then at least morphologically it's mirroring. And in this picture, we pair linguistic items with worldly items, and meaning emerges from that pairing, representational pairing. And this leads naturally to a model theoretic approach, We construct models of the world, and our expressions are meaningful insofar as they can be evaluated as true or false under some possible configuration of that world. Meaning, in this tradition, is knowing under what conditions an expression would be true, and when those conditions are then matched, satisfied, they match the actual world, the expression is true. In this framework, truth in this correspondence sense is not only a semantic notion, becomes a normative measure of epistemic success. The standard by which we evaluate knowing, as it's well known in the classical view, truth is a necessary to not sufficient component of knowledge. As you know, this tradition is technically formidable. It's historically dominant, has been dominant, and canonical figures include people like Frege, Russell, De Olly, Wittgenstein, picture there, Tarski, and in most of probably majority of contemporary analytic philosophers. And as a result of this, semantic notions such as truth, validity, meaning, and reference are typically defined through functionally and through model theoretical terms. Okay, this is the sort of the background that I wanted to give this, and then contrast to this to my, not only to my, but in general to the pragmatist way to approach things. Of course, pragmatism is a big school itself, so there's no only one way to go about it, but something is shared, and some of it definitely questions this representationalist tradition. So let me change the slide. The pragmatist turn of framework, I'll turn for me anyway. So the methodologism is thus to be that I develop in the book. That's I repeat the name, doing, knowing, and getting it right, pragmatism as methodologism. And it marks a departure from this tradition I just laid out. It draws from a minority, but a powerful line of thought, whose most immediate sources inferentialism, and particularly in the works of Wilfrid Sellars and Robert Brandon. And maybe the core idea is that the pragmatics precede semantics, and doing, inferring, not representing are the fundamental notions. Meaning and knowing must therefore be explained through use, practice, including the roles expressions play in practice in when we use language. So we're familiar that Brandon calls this inferentialism. He came up with this term in contrast to representationalism, although he often treats, in fact, if you read far enough, he treats them as two sides of the same coin, although I'm actually less conciliatory between these two options. One of the guiding principles of this, my methodologism, is what I call systematic consistency with the pragmatist tenets. So that means that doing and rule-governed practice precede representation globally, even supposing that we want to use the concept of representation. Even in that case, it must precede. Or in other words, it means to align semantic, epistemological, and ontological commitment with the pragmatist starting point, that doing and regulated practice are the most fundamental notions used to make sense of all other philosophical concepts, basically. So methodologism aims to define both meaning and knowing in wholly pragmatic terms without compromises. Compromises, I argue, introduce philosophical inconsistencies, which is a vice, and they, in this case, would smuggle representational assumptions into a framework meant to be anti-representationalist. In my view, Brandon does sometimes fall into this compromise, as I just said. So, the central tenet of methodologism is therefore anti-representationalism. And the idea is that if representationalism doesn't work, and I believe it does not as a global option in any case, we must explain the meaningfulness and epistemic authority of expressions in some other way than through functionally or through conditionally. So in this situation, the focus shifts from matching the world to acts of claiming, practice, acts of claiming. So what makes a particular claim acceptable or unacceptable within a community? What regulates that practice? This kind of doing is, of course, never just any behavior or any doing or just any practice, any random practice. It's always purposeful or functional with regard to some purpose, and it's normatively covered. So these structured rules distinguish correct from incorrect moves within this practice. I have actually right. I'm moving on. I will still actually go back if I may. Okay, it's fine. We can go to the problems of representationalism. I just claim that representationalism doesn't work, and now I'd like to briefly indicate why it's problematic. It's a long story, a contested story, of course, but I think Sellars and Wittgenstein before him, and most recently, most strongly, Louis Price have done much of the groundwork here. So here's a list of some of the problems, and well, as you see, this talking about this, each would deserve at least an hour or more, but today now only one sentence or two. So the first problem would be the placement problem, which says that there are many common sense objects, mental states, meanings, moral values, modalities, which cannot be easily placed in a naturalistic representational model of the world. So, of course, one can then either keep up representationalism or keep up naturalism and the scientific worldview. And those are the options. But if one is a naturalist, then there will be a problem where to place some of the objects that are in our common sense ontology. The second one is non-factualism of language. Hugh Price notes that the Fregean truth value-based semantics has trouble with questions, commands, and the many ordinary utterances because they are not fact-stating at all. He says, he writes, a Fregean theory of language should be embarrassed by the existence of utterances such as questions and commands. So, non-fact, the true functional factualism cannot capture all the meaning of language. The myth of the given, it's of course the famous idea of Sellars. Wilfrid Sellars, who showed that the world does not give us self-identifying meanings or concepts. So whenever we classify something as an F, it always involves inferential commitments and the possibility of an error. So it presents some kind of inferential network or conceptual network when we are identifying and recognizing objects. The fourth one would be meaning is not world relational. And this is comes from Sellars. Sellars' functional theory of meaning again. Meaning statements are not relations. Well, that's the claim, that's the theory, that's an alternative theory. They are not relations between words and things, but are constituted by the inferential roles expressions occupy. And the final here would be that there is no universal grammar. And this is the lesson from Wittgenstein, who taught, we may argue that there is no single abstract form underlying all languages or language games. So to understand language comprehensively, we must study the use and use of expressions and how this language is actually, or language games work and how expressions function. We need to study functions. That's my spin on Wittgenstein. So taken together, these points converge on one insight, meaning knowing, and we could also add here truth, cannot be grounded in world relations, and certainly not only world relations alone. They must be explained through inferential and justificatory roles within practice. Now, I know that representationalism seems natural, almost inevitable, as Press has also commented to many. But as I think what is clear in any case, that as a global account of meaning and knowing, it's riddled with problems. It's problematical. Okay, this is basically, I think I'm trying to change the slide the beginning, but I still want to say a few issues about why methodologism then in this situation. And it's really premised on the problems of representationalism. Well, that's one of the big premises here. So if matching the world is not what determines whether a claim is acceptable, matching the world representation relation doesn't determine whether a claim is acceptable, then the normative criteria for acceptance and rejection must be found elsewhere. And therefore, methodologism focuses on the conditions of claiming, what makes a claim acceptable or unacceptable, and under what circumstances it's warranted or it needs to be rejected. And since claiming is doing, it's a practice, it's an act, we must understand the kind of doing that leads to acceptance or rejection and what regulates this practice. And furthermore, because language is public, the rules that matter are communal rules. And we can apply this approach to any claim, not only which doesn't only describe social acceptance, but identifies the normative reasons that justify this assertion, any assertion at all. And when we accept, if it happens that we accept a claim, we add it to the set of commitments we acknowledge. So that's called score keeping in Brandam's terms. Of course, different kind of rules matter here. There are basic inferential rules of language and reasoning. There are sometimes fields generally field-specific standards, aims and maxims. But they all together contribute to determining whether the claim is acceptable and in this pragmatic sense, whether it's claimable or correct to be claimed. So we arrive at the picture that the epistemic authority for any claim emerges from justification and reasons, and even in some cases, something like a proof rather than truth in a broad sense. And this leads to the slogan of methodologism: knowing is doing correctly, and correctly is in relation to the rules governing this practice, including inferential rules and other rules of reason, as well as field-specific rules in the sciences. So where the classical tradition says justified true belief, methodologism replaces truth with correct doing, or for truth as a linguistic predicate, of course, stays in the picture. So it's a successful rule-governed practical performance when you're doing correct, we can claim to know. To know is to do correctly within community's practice, and this can also take a non-linguistic form. So I have also argued there somewhere that, predominantly that the main notion of knowing should be knowing how instead of knowing that, and knowing that may be cashed out in terms of knowing how in the end. And a few more words. The meaning theory of methodologism parallels this. Just as knowing is the correctness of doing, meaning is the propriety of use, or how an expression is used, what rules govern the use of an expression. They constitute the rules governing an expression's use constitute its meaning. So once more, not by matching the world, but by determining its role in inferential practices. Why then to talk about methods? And I have here simply two reasons before I move on to the HBS considerations. So first is really the etymological one. A method is a way, etymologically, an inquiry, a procedure for achieving something. It's never random, it's rule-bound, it's guided by what one aims to achieve. So claiming correctly is such a method, such a way, a rule-bound way of securing normative acceptance. So that's one reason. The second is really relating to the tradition of pragmatism, and both Peirce and Dewey emphasized method as the key to understanding knowledge, and Dewey put it, there is the quotation, the value of any cognitive conclusion depends upon the method by which it's reached. And this is roughly my view as well. And finally, very briefly, I want to add something possibly interesting and something that I hadn't realized very well not long time ago still. There is a line of thought from proof theoretic semantics and intuitivist logic that aligns strikingly well with methodologism. It has roots in Wittgensteinian idea that the meaning of expressions is determined by the use. And then also more specifically in Gensen Damet and Pravitz, among others. So and this what they call proof theoretic semantics grounds meaning not in truth conditions, but in proof conditions. I already mentioned it's not the truth, but it's the proof, how you show it right, how you prove. Of course, it works better, more easily with logical notions, but I guess inferentialism can be considered as an extension to natural language and to all kinds of social practices. So proof conditions issues to proof condition in the ways one is entitled to move from claim A to B, or make this inference from A to B. And so there would be a formal, in proof theoretic semantics, would be a formal articulation of the same impulse that underlies methodologism. The epistemic authority lies not in mirroring the world, but in the procedures, inferences, and justificatory practices through which claims are made and defended. Now, I leave this matter here, methodologism, I return it briefly in the end and go now to the HBS considerations. And of course, if you're interested in the main tenets of this methodologism as pragmatism, then the book is hopefully out soon. So then let's consider the state of the marriage in HBS. Is it the case that it should file for a divorce? I mean, in some cases it seems that maybe, but let's see. So this marriage concerns the marriage between history of science and philosophy of science. And yes, you are probably familiar with the, of course you are, as most of the audience today, that there have been long-standing and energetic efforts to integrate these two fields. And this aspiration has been with us at least since the rise of the historical philosophy of science, and of course, especially since the publication of Kuhn's structured scientific revolutions. And there are problems, there have been problems. And whenever we think about this relationship between history and philosophy of science, we are essentially asking how history is relevant for philosophy, and conversely, how philosophy might matter for history. It's such a difficult question to answer. And one very common way of depicting is indeed this metaphor of relationship or metaphor of a marriage. And to the best of my knowledge, it was Ronald Geer who first introduced this metaphor in his 1973 paper, History and Philosophy of Science, Intimate Relationship or Marriage of Convenience. Geer's view was that the two fields form a marriage of convenience, since each one actually has a better relationship with science itself. He noted, with some dry humor, I imagine, that this was still better than living with one's parents. Those are his words. And since then, an astonishing number of papers have taken up this metaphor. Macmullen, writing a year later, insisted that marriage was not just one of convenience. And then similarly, Berrien in 1979 spoke of more than a marriage of convenience. Kruger 1982, argued for a marriage for the sake of reason, and much later, Friedman, Chomsky, Dixon, attempting to reinvigorate the marriage that was in 2010. Alan Richardson described the trajectory as going from troubled marriage to uneasy co-location. And Scholl, not long ago, in 2018, offered scenes from a marriage, suggesting that the confrontation model might provide a path forward in this relationship. So clearly, there has been no shortage of relationship counseling already before my pragmatist counseling today. Many papers, there are many other papers, of course, that analyze relation between history and philosophy of science, history and philosophy, or history and philosophy of science without explicitly using marital metaphors, but still they deal with similar consideration. So let's take Philosophy of Science Association published issues in 1992, 1994, asking whether the two fields have anything to say each other. That's a quotation, and whether they belong instead in a broader interdisciplinary landscape. And of course, there's simply too much literature at this point, even to try to summarize this comprehensively at all. Now, the underlying question now remains: can this marriage be saved? Should it be saved? And I'm one of those who believe that some form of integration between history of science, philosophy of science is desirable. So I also recognize that the situation is complicated. As always, different authors diagnose here and in life, they diagnose problems differently, and some are more optimistic than others. And some see any attempt to live under the same roof as hopeless due to fundamentally different lifestyles or life philosophies or whatever, while others believe accommodation is nevertheless possible. And I tried to, I really prepared this stuff for to talk today and tried to look at some of the models, not comprehensively, but I came up with three models. And I think the first one would be what I then called the disparity model. Disparity model claims that history of science and philosophy of science are simply different kinds of cognitive enterprises. Geer is the archetypical defender of this view in his 1973 paper. He criticizes Kenneth Schaffner for failing to clarify whether his criteria are descriptive or normative. Geer writes, it's unclear whether Schaffner is doing logic or sociology. And until this is clear, it will seem that he has reconciled the logical and historical schools only by ignoring the real philosophical differences. So there are real philosophical differences. This contrast between descriptive and normative orientations was well captured by McMullin a year later, and who writes, so on the slides too, the historicist will be content with an account which is tentative, descriptive, subject to change, whereas the logicist will hope to enunciate principles that are exact, normative, and immutable. McMullin continues then, the historicist work is empirical, it's controlled by what he finds in the records. The logicist can lay down norms in what almost seems an a priori way. So logicist represents here, of course, the philosopher. But I think that these quotations encapsulate the core of the disparity model. And that's that cognitive approaches of these two fields are distinct and incompatible. History is descriptive, particular, it's empirical. Philosophy is normative, aspires generality. In some sense, it's a priori. I move on to the second, which I've been, it's the confrontation model. So philosophy proposes history tests. And that one might say that it is more optimistic with regard to the relation. So idea is that philosophers provide these conceptual frameworks and history tests them. And to the best of my knowledge, again, this was introduced quite late by Jutta Shikore in paper called More Thoughts on HPS, another 20 years later in 2011. And she defines it secondly as follows. Foreseeing HPS means confronting general philosophical frameworks with historical data. So in this model, there's a division of labor, which resembles theoretician and experimenter. In the sciences, philosophers devise theories of scientific change in Lori Lodan and VPI's project, Virginia Polytechnic's famous project in the 1980s. So philosophers devise theories of scientific change, historians provide the empirical material. And Shikore thinks that this model has dominated the first 40 years of HPS and mentioned the Raphael Scholl, and he has recently defended a modified version of it and argues that the confrontation model still offers conceptual and practical insight. Now, I already say that, but I will say it later, but it seems that the integration is very unequal in this mode. And it's more philosophical and history is more in the role of a handmaiden. I move on to the third model, which is the hermeneutic model. And this is the relationship in this situation is fundamentally iterative, it's dialogical, and the strength of the relationship lies in the mutual shaping of concepts and historical understanding. And I guess the starting point one can say is that philosophical concepts and methodological assumptions are themselves historically formed. So therefore, whatever philosopher brings on the board, its philosophical reflection always involves historical reflection. Equally important is the idea that philosophical analysis is interpretative. We begin with a provisional concepts and refine them as we interpret historical material. And this is Shikore's articulation as follows. We approach the materials with a preliminary sense of the whole. We revise these preliminary notions in light of what we find. We specify, modify, and reconcile until the descriptions of episodes considered exemplary and analytic tools and generalizations coincide in the sense of reflexive equilibrium. In her version, history, though, becomes one partner among many, she writes. The idea that history should give better access to knowledge than, say, sociology or cognitive science becomes strange and implausible. This opens the door to multiple partners, so to speak, perhaps to polygamy, sociology, cognitive science, anthropology, cultural studies, media studies, making history one contributing among many other, not necessarily the privileged one. So those are the three models, but I wanted to mention one more. This fourth voice, so to speak, this which is expressed by Pinnick and Gale in their paper called Philosophy of Science and the History of Science, a troubling interaction, written 2009. So they diagnose a bit differently, fundamental methodological, that there's a fundamental methodological dualism in HPS. And this dualism is a problem. As they write, a case study that successfully serves philosophical aims is uninteresting to the historian, perhaps even methodologically flawed, whereas a case study that satisfies historiographical canons is useless for the philosopher, perhaps even methodologically flawed. And I think this is a good and sharp observation and hard to ignore. And their key conclusion is equally interesting. Real progress in historicized philosophy of science is to be had from reaching a methodological consensus. In other words, and extending this idea a little bit, we can say that integration requires a shared methodology or shared inquiry, broadly concepts. And if you achieve that, that would mark a genuine progress in the integration of HPS. Okay, where does it leave us now? So we can now ask, should this marriage be saved? And what did this imply for the relation between history and philosophy of science? And I think this disparity model is most pessimistic. And if true, we really should file for divorce. Nothing to do with each other. The confrontation model favors philosophers, turning history into an empirical handmaiden. And then the hermeneutic model is the most promising, but still offers philosophically driven. It is still often philosophically driven. And in some ways, it's promiscuous in its choice of partners. And then we have then the Pinnick and Gale, who indeed suggest that we need a shared modern method, and that's a deeper issue. Without the shared methodology, this relationship just cannot work. Now, I'm approaching and now moving to the final third section of my talk today, and this is trying to apply the idea of methodologism and pragmatism to this problem of integration of HPS. So it's time for some pragmatist therapy. So I argue that pragmatism and the methodologism provides precisely promise for the shared methodological ground that then can bridge the long-standing tension between descriptive history and normative philosophy. I'm not sure if this has been expressed before, but I'll try my best now. So let's have a look at Kuhn. Let's begin this odyssey by turning to our attention to Kuhn and his structure of scientific revolutions, because arguably he remains the most influential representative of HPS foundational figure. And he also struggled with the same problem as Gear and how to reconcile the descriptive ethos of history of science with the normative aspirations of philosophy of science. So we can ask, is Kuhn's account of science as problem solving meant simply as a description of how science in fact develops? Or is it also a normative theory about what science and scientists ought to do? In the postscript to this book, that's my favorite image of the book, by the way, of course, many editions. Kuhn gives us an intriguing passage, and where he writes that structure presents a theory about the nature of science, and the theory has consequences for the ways in which scientists should behave if the enterprise is to succeed. Though it need not be right, provides a legitimate basis for reiterative oughts and shoulds. Conversely, one set of reasons for taking the theory seriously is that scientists do in fact behave as the theory says they should. My descriptive generalizations are evidence for the normative theory, precisely because they can also be derived from it. So this is an attempt to unite the normative and descriptive, although it's a little cryptic to understand what he means here. That's a fascinating claim. And Kuhn seems to be suggesting somehow that descriptions can somehow be derived from norms, from a normative theory of science. So a description provides evidence for a normative theory, and maybe even vice versa. But this raises an uncomfortable question to start with. So are we determining now is that the claim, our historical descriptions through preconceived ideas about science? So that if we think that science is or should be, say, problem solving, then our discovery of problem solving confirms that. And this would be, I think, unhappy situation for a historical philosopher of science. considering what they attempted to do for philosophy of science. It would go against the historical philosophy of science commitment to subject philosophical claims to empirical scrutiny. And ironically, I think it would place Kuhn surprisingly close to the very school he helped to supplant, logical empiricism. Now, let's consider and recall that logical empiricism was centrally focused on formulating the correct theory of science, including the language of science, the structural theories, the nature of observation in knowing, and so on and so forth. For them, explanations of how particular theories emerged, historical explanations, sociological, psychological, and so on, were firmly rejected as irrelevant to justification. This stance was, of course, best crystallized in Reichenbach's distinction between the context of discovery and the context of justification. It's a very, very famous one. And we can compare these to the so-called rationality debates by the 1960s and 70s, when historical philosophy of science was at its height. An acute question concerned whether there existed a single scientific method that could justify scientific theories, demarcate science from pseudoscience, and explain why science is rational. Kuhn, Feyerabend, and others argued that historical record offered no such support for any single universal scientific method. But again, no clear view of how descriptive and normative dimensions could be brought together in HBS emerged. So let's continue a little further and yet once more reformulate why the existing models don't solve this tension. Let's reduce the three models to the descriptive normative tension. So what we discussed was the disparity model. So it clearly commits to this split between descriptive and normative components. And that's why precisely why integration seems hopeless under this view. History describes, philosophy prescribes. The confrontation model accepts the split as well, but it institutionalizes it. Philosophy contributes abstract concepts, history delivers the empirical reality check. And then we have the hermeneutical model, which I think is interestingly is not as far removed from confrontation and confrontation model as it may first appear. Instead, it offers a more dynamic, iterative relation. There is no raw data, only conceptually shaped data, and likewise no pure abstract philosophy. Sigore actually herself noticed that the VPI Virginia Polytechnic, Loudon and others project had implicit hermeneutical tendencies. Loudon and colleagues began from, this is their term, from preferred pre-analytical intuitions, which were then adjusted in light of case studies. And again, Scholl mentioned a few times his recent defense of the confrontation model explicitly introduces an iterative dimension into it. So although this hermeneutical model is more flexible, I think the basic division between description and the norm still lurks beneath the surface. Right. So this brings me to the crucial point of today's lecture. And then
and you have 15 minutes.
Okay, that sounds perfect. Thank you. So what can pragmatism and methodology contribute to the situation? As outlined in the first part, so I'll rely now on it. And what can it offer to this sort of noble aspiration to integrate HBS? So my argument is that they promise to bridge the gap between the descriptive and the normative. But how? One asks how is this possible? And one way to encapsulate this is to return Brandon's, the greatest contemporary practitioner, to Brandon's inferentialism, according to which we are, as discursive creatures, are fundamentally normative beings. And this is embodied, of course, in the famous Brandom slogan that we are always playing the game of giving and asking for reasons. Brandom accepts this Aristotelian idea that humans are quintessentially rational animals. And on this view, there is no such thing as purely non-normative empirical description, because description is made by humans with our discursive competences. Similarly, consider Sellas's equally well-known remark. He says, in characterizing an episode or a state as that of knowing, we are not giving an empirical description of that episode or state. We are placing it in the logical space of reasons or justifying and being able to justify what one says. And for today's purposes, this is the key. The key is that Sellas transforms what is conventionally thought of as an empirical matter into a normative one. Knowledge belongs to the space of reasons, not to the space of causes, at least not only to the space of causes. And this is the key. This is, I think, that provides foundational insight for integrating HBS2. And I'll give the formulation of this in my own practice orientation in terms of methodologism very briefly, but a little bit perhaps pragmatically. So here, I think this 4 tenets would take us far for the sort of methodologist integration of HBS. We need some core commitments. And one is the pragmatist idea that philosophy should focus on practice. Practice precedes and grounds semantics and metaphysics. I think this is shared by all pragmatists, this view. And as I said earlier, in methodologism, meaning and knowing are understood through specific kinds of doing. The second is that practice takes the form of communal action. Human practices are social through and through, and we are, as Brandom, concept-mongering creatures. Scientific communities are one kind of social formation governed by their own rule structure. The third one is that communal action is rule-bound, it's regulated. All communities operate under rules, ranging from table manners and traffic rules to the norms governing research, publication, and theory choice. And a pragmatist methodologist investigates this normative regime and these rules of human beings and their communities. And then the final is the fourth one: the rules just are normative, and therefore they determine the acts as correct and incorrect. Correctness is in relation to rules. Rules instruct how one should act. Chess illustrates this well, and it is often used metaphor, playing chess. The game is constituted by its rules, so the rules constitute the game, not stuff or matter. It doesn't matter whether pieces are food, plastic, or imagined on a shading like in the Queen's Gambit, or in Sellas, he talks about chess. It's chess, which is made of massive land areas and car, branch of car. It doesn't matter. Rules is that constitutes the game. Although it's then worth saying that rules do not dictate. They structure possibilities without determining outcomes. So this, my lecture today is rule-bound, regulated because of language and other conventions, but of course, nothing determines what I will say now. Next, although it's clear that there are things that I should not say because they are violations of linguistic or other rules. So methodologism generalizes this. So our practices are normative because they are rule-governed, And in addition, there is no transcendent standpoint here, beyond any social formations, from which to determine correct, let's say, representationally. Correctness, normativity lives within practices. And then how this helps to integrate HPS, how does this bridge history and philosophy? And this is the central insight here. If all practice is normatively structured, then historians' ostensibly descriptive work is already normatively saturated. And the philosopher's normative work is constituted by and tied to actual practice and practices, which is then again exactly what historian describes. The historian examines what scientists and communities have done, but because community practices are rule-bound, the historian's descriptions inherently involve a normativity of the community this historian studied. And of course, we may add that the historian's own descriptions are also governed by the historian's own epistemic standards and of his whole own community rules as well. And then likewise, philosophy examines the same rules and norms, aiming to clarify their structure, normative implicatures, and the relation to success in scientific inquiry, for example. And I'm now really approaching the very end of my talk. A couple of slides to go. And I think this would dissolve the deep divide between normative descriptive. There is no purely descriptive side and no purely normative side either. And in pragmatism, methodologism, normativity resides in practice itself. There is thus no community transcendent, so-called, sometimes called genuine normativity that transcends all possible social formation communities. Norms are social, historical, and communal, which is precisely why historical inquiry is so important to philosophical understanding. We might put simply that for the pragmatist, the descriptive and the normative are two sides of the same coin. The is and the of come together in practice. And finally, this approach invites us to investigate, of course, the diversity of historical communities, their rules, and how they shape their views of coping with the world. And undeniably, some communities were more successful than others. And of course, and then methodologism does have resources for evaluating such differences in their practices and such as different degrees of rationality of those communities, without, therefore, then collapsing into relativism and without declaring all communities equal or anything like that. So it also enables investigation into why scientific communities, despite their variation, share certain normatively potent features. So what is similar, what unites them, what explains their success, what are the rules, aims, inferential structures, and practices that potentially jointly explain their remarkable success in coping with the world and improving our explanation, and specifically in comparison to any other form of knowing. So here I think science is superior. And I'm coming now to my closing thoughts. And so I end with the metaphors that we started with, and ask what image of the metaphors might capture best this pragmatist and methodologist integration of HPS. So if we wanted to stay with the relationship metaphor, then there's certainly, it would be a functional and symbiotic partnership, one with a clear shared interest. But perhaps we can, perhaps we should look for a different analogy. So think instead, as they're in the picture, of two musicians performing the same piece. Perhaps one plays the violin and the other clarinet. They participate in the same larger performance and collective effort. The roles differ, and they do the required skills, techniques, instruments, they differ as well. Crucially, there is no fundamental cleavage between them. They can practice in the same space, belong to the same community, and what they produce is not disparaging or irrelevant to each other. In other words, they engage in the same practice, making music in this metaphor, but with different techniques, sensibilities, and responsibilities. Neither can replace the other, and the performance succeeds only because both parts are present and coordinated. At best, their efforts complement each other. And of course, there are other roles in the background, there are other roles in the orchestra as well, but that's not our topic here. This, I think, is a far better, I have very little to go, image for a pragmatist and methodologist in the creation. Different roles, one shared activity, distinct contributions, one wider normative space that regulates what's permissible and what is not, even though, of course, on another level, these normative regimes may differ too. Of course, there's possible limitation, and I'm in the very final part of my proposal, and not everyone working in HPS is a pragmatist, and it's perfectly fine. I would like to want to oblige anyone to accept pragmatism if one doesn't want, nor does committing, even if one then does commit to pragmatism, it doesn't require mastering its full technical machinery. But I have tried to show today is that there are genuine advantages in taking a pragmatist stance, especially if one cares about an integrated HPS. That is, pragmatism offers a way of dissolving one of the most persistent problems in the field, the supposed dichotomy between empirical description and normative appraisal. And I think it brings those together by locating normativity within practice itself. Okay, so I'm now finished, and I'd like to just thank for your attention for the past 60 minutes. And so I'm happy to continue now discussion and hear your thoughts about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Perfect timing. So now we, oh yeah, absolutely perfect. So now we can move to the Q&A. Please, people, in reactions, you can choose to raise your hand if you have any questions. And I'm going to start with Dubian and then Atocha, please. Okay, if Dubian is not ready yet, do you have any problem opening your mic? No, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Kukarnen, for your talk. I have a couple of questions. One is about...
Let's keep it one per round. So if there is time, I go back to you.
Okay, let me begin with the second question then. I really like your pragmatist proposal to dissolve the tension between history and philosophy of science as a normative tension, as a tension between normative versus descriptive commitments. But I would like to know whether your pragmatist model is designed, is specifically designed for resolving dissolving the normative versus descriptive divide, or it can also be applied to resolve the inherent tension of integrated HPS, which is also caught in terms besides the normative versus the descriptive. For instance, another way of saying that we cannot integrate history and philosophy is because both are adopting conflicting metaphysical commitments, essentialism versus contingentism, as you himself argued in a paper some years ago. So what do you think about these other ways of characterizing the inherent tension of integrated HPS?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's an excellent question and good challenge, because of course there are other problems, potentially other problems. Also, I think this is the might be the primary and most difficult challenge in this normative descriptive. To your exact question, whether this is designed, it's not designed, but when I started thinking about it, I saw an inference or possibility that it could contribute solving this descriptive normative tension. I do, however, I haven't thought about it, but I do see that there is potential to contribute and potentially resolve some other problems. But of course, one needs to be a pragmatist in some sense. So the big issue is that if you do some old-time metaphysics, then we can talk, but there is points where our premises are probably a little different. So for example, if you think about these metaphysical commitments, then of course a pragmatist of my kind, a neo-pragmatist, understand is beliefs of one community, and we can understand and analyze the functions of those beliefs, rules and structures of this community, and make sense of them. But we don't start playing the metaphysical game as such. So if given historian, given philosopher come up with other, then that's what happened. I mean, if you go to the past, we have a lot of different communities. There's diversity, there's plurality, but maybe the fundamental premise is that we treat them as expressions of some normative structures and treat them as you know as a communal formations, and that's the standpoint how we go on about analyzing why did you come to believe given metaphysical presupposition and so on. So this is the way I would start developing it.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Vivian. Atocha, please.
Yes, thank you, Maria. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Well, first of all, Joni, it's very nice to have you here, even remote. And also thank you, Teresa and Maria, for this wonderful workshop. So my question is taking, yes, and I will follow Aurelia's comment that I think it would be nice if you stop sharing your presentation so we may see each other. My question is, okay, so you raised the issue about the importance of methodology. And let me go to your, let me put it this way, your metaphor of two musicians playing. Who is the director? And then go back to the marriage metaphor. One of the problems, not so much with philosophy and history of science, but with philosophers and historians, is that they want to direct the piece. So, you know, there has been a lot of fight, even departments have split because of these tensions, and it's not so much between the disciplines, but the people doing the disciplines. So because of your importance or emphasis on methodology, I suppose this is case by case, but what would you say about who directs the piece?
Yes, thank you. Fair question. I came up with this metaphor quite late in the stage. And yeah, it would be very difficult to appoint a director who that would be indeed. Maybe Hasok Chang might be. No, kidding. So I think there is no director in this, but of course, I don't know how an orchestra would play music without a director. Probably the quality would get a little worse, but I think they could do it. So what is the director in the sense of what is giving the rules and structures and formations, how to play violin, how to coordinate together. It's a tradition. It's a tradition, and I think that's a very pragmatist answer, I think. I come up with historical tradition, then starts the coordination work from that on. Maybe someone can rise to a leader, but not the director.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kirsten, please.
Thanks. Yeah, super interesting talk. I guess my question is maybe, again, largely coming from the metaphor, the kind of, a marriage of convenience. But what you're really talking about with integrated HPS isn't really kind of two disciplines coming together so much. I mean, that kind of suggests that it's just historians coming together with philosophers and each kind of bringing their own expertise and happily working together. But that's not really how it works, because I mean, even as you showed us, a lot of when we start thinking about practice and we start thinking about what kinds of evidence we need in order to make claims about science, well, we're bringing in, sociology and a bunch of other kinds of areas of expertise. And so, so it seems like, I mean, if we're trying to find some sort of metaphor to describe this, what we're looking for is, some big poly household, right? But that kind of led me to what my actual question is, which is like, where is the expertise supposed to reside here? Is the idea that you genuinely have kind of research communities where you've got, people with these different expertise who are able to work together, or would it be, or is it really one of those cases where, say, philosophers need to be going to the archive and doing some of the history for themselves? Because I mean, let's face it, it's not great if you're a philosopher trying to do HPS work and you're relying solely on secondary historical literature, right? Historians traditionally don't ask the same kinds of questions as philosophers do. They go into the archives with very different kinds of kind of questions and expertise and so on. And so, so I'm just kind of curious about how the expertise is supposed to work.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to formulate something to the first question first. And I do think that it's probably a philosopher that would need to do more shifting here. I mean, well, if you're not the pragmatist, at least in that situation, shift to the position where you actually take these communities and their rules and normative structures as an important object of analysis, perhaps giving up on big transcendental dreams to nail it down how it really is. And there, the metaphor, whether it's good or bad, at least it keeps them, those two persons in the picture, doing a little different things. So it suggests that a philosopher wouldn't need to go to the archives, but would need to accept that sort of, and this is maybe the fundamental answer, the sort of the object and sort of root cause of both sort of description and the normative regimes is the same, and that's the community. So the stuff in the way, even though the technique, then the other goes to the archives or whatever, and the other is different kind of analysis with that material or archives. And the I guess where does the expertise? That would be the shared object of research, of analysis in a way, but then yes, I think the expertise, then you would still have different set of skills applied to specific tasks. And of course, I think this is a bigger problem for pragmatists than maybe for many other scholars. So I want to have something shared, not universal, but something shared. But at the same time, I recognize the need for difference, divergence, and plurality. And this would be shared on this practical level, but then within that, you can diverge in terms of your roles, techniques.
Thank you very much to the two of you. Then Julia, please.
Yes, thank you very much. In fact, my question is a perfect follow-up on Kirsten's question. I was wondering a very similar thing about your really inspiring talk, Joni. So the first formulation of my question would have been something like, for me, after listening to you, it's easier to imagine a historian becoming coming a little closer to philosophical inquiry, because they have to take into account normative considerations when studying practices, than the opposite, than the philosopher coming closer to historical inquiry. And it's interesting that in your answer to Kirsten now, you seem to be saying almost the opposite. So you said that for you, it's the historian that has to cover, the philosopher that has to cover more ground, coming closer to a sort of historical or historicist sensitivity. So now I'm wondering, I'm trying to reformulate the question as a bit of a follow-up on that. And I was wondering whether that double, let's say, perspective might be related to the way you have introduced this idea of practice as a quintessentially normative object, right? Because so stressing that, I very much see how the consequence of that argument would be, whenever you reconstruct a practice historically or descriptively, you also have to engage very seriously with normative considerations, either as premises of your investigation or as results. But I couldn't see as clearly toward the end of your talk how the opposite is also true. So in a way, to put it in a encapsulating sentence, one could say something like, yes, practice is normative, but also normativity is necessarily embodied or embedded in practices. So there is no way that you can inquire or investigate normative considerations, whether if you abstract completely from the practices in which this normativity is embedded. And so my question to you would be whether that is actually what you would be prepared to argue. And is that the way that you try to spell out methodologism for a different understanding of normativity, both epistemic and maybe else some other kind of normativity as well?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I guess yes, but I maybe I need to ask you to repeat one more the statement over that, because it seems perfectly that I would be aligned to say. So I don't actually, I'm not very shaken by the suggestion, because it seems to flow naturally from what I would be thinking. But maybe I missed.
No, maybe it was just a question of the exposition. Toward the end of your talk, you stress very much the idea of practice being a normative object. And I completely see why that would, let's say, flow from a pragmatist approach. And I also can see how that makes the historian more engaged in normative considerations. By the way, I think that this, this confrontation model that you presented at the beginning is oversimplifying the fact that historians have always been dealing with normative questions. So it is completely true, I think, that raw description doesn't exist. But what I missed toward the end of your lecture was an equal insistence on the fact that equally, we cannot really have pure normativity. So we have normativity only, you see?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Equally, we can't have pure normativity. Yes, but then I take it as a given. I guess if you make what would that even mean? Because if you make claims and they come with normative considerations, the claims often deals with let's say empirical stuff or stuff in the world, engagement with them, feedback mechanism, success. We can do that, of course, in very pragmatist terms. If things we say actually return our expectations, and that feeds into our understanding whether we could see them as warranted in the future, whether we should keep making them or whether we should revise them. And yes, I think in this sense, of course, there is the empirical, but empirical is in its sense, in the Sellarsian sense, it's part of the logical space of reason, so it's a normatively intrinsic. So yes, I see they are meshed, and maybe to add, it may be in this argument, as Sellars once say, that what he wants to supplant is an image, Platonist image. So I'm not doing that here, but on another occasion. So whether not Platonist image, but what I'm trying to, regarding the confrontation, change the image, that the image is wrong, less than the actual, let's say, what as you can tell, what the historians do. So maybe they've been engaged with the normative stuff, but they, just with the certain type of image of what they're doing, the self-reflection is wrong. And if I may, I still add one more thing is, yeah, I think the historian would be naturally, well, I don't really know this, but something because they analyze the communities and community beliefs anyway. So sort of close, of course, a little bit revise what they think they are doing. So it's a hard task, but maybe the philosophers, some of them probably would need an independent argument to become pragmatists. And the real philosophical struggle is, of course, there. That if you are not pragmatist, then okay, we need to keep arguing why should one be a pragmatist. And of course, I can then show the card that, okay, this would be a neat solution, perhaps neat solution or possible solution for the empirical and the normative descriptive, dichotomy. But yeah, it tells that one commits to certain issues regarding pragmatism. Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much to the two of you. Now we have Axel and then we have Andres, and I will ask you please to make it as concrete as possible so we can still make it on time. So Axel?
Okay, I'll try. Yeah, so as a pragmatist, as an inferentialist myself, I'm very friendly to the project, and actually would push you to be even more of an inferentialist.
Yes.
Especially because of the sort of problems you seem to be facing now in the way you answer these questions. Because one way, at least my favorite way of presenting the moral of inferentialism is that the way the descriptive normative line is blurred is by saying that it is the very, very same thing. It is just as the way the phenomena are described, that we can say, oh, you're doing a descriptive task or you're doing a normative task, even though it is the same task. So the idea it would be that what historians are doing, what philosophers are doing are really not different things that need to be reconciled or need to be, right? Because,
yeah.
So what does the jam mean here?
So, yeah, I mean, I sort of agree that there's so much, but I guess the thing one might add is like, as linguistic terms or predicates, people keep applying this normative or descriptive. So I wouldn't necessarily to be there to do so much conceptual engineering as if to remove them and replace them with one concept. And I guess there's the same if you are deflationist about truth, till you accept most of them that unlike Ramsey, that you're not redundant there, but there's a linguistic predicate just emptied of the content. So I guess something like that. And I think Brandom also has this idea with representationist notions that they don't do I can't remember the terms we use, but they don't do their proper explanatory work, but he accepts them as I guess, is it expressive notions? Yeah. So yeah, but I think I agree with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect. So Andres?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so hi, Professor Buchanan. Thank you for your talk. I was concerned about the stability of this marriage be so dependent on the equally of these norms being equally interpretable and equally identifiable across history and philosophy. And that might be not granted. For example, in Lakatos's accounts of history and philosophy, epistemic norms were posited by us philosophers. And in confrontation model, for example, it was something like adjusting a function to some given empirical point, right? But now it seems that these norms have to be like so embedded and in such an intrinsic way, such that historians and philosophers could identify them. So how could this be granted? That's my question.
So to rephrase to ask, are you worried that the sort of the description becomes too normatively or too homogeneous regard to the norms of these two, let's say, professions or communities, historians and philosophers? Is that there should be more divergence in terms of their norms?
Yeah,
Norms?
my question is, how do we grant that historians and philosophers equally interpret the same norms, or they get the same conclusions from the historical records? I can see it clear why historians and philosophers could get the same information of the same periods, of the same empirical data, if you wanted to see it like that.
How can we guarantee? I guess if you formulate it like that, I don't think nothing guarantees that really. And I mean, here I would take the Rortian card and say that it's only the discourse that can settle where we end up with. However, also, what does important work is with or according to what rules. I mean, if our rules of the game, so to speak, we are playing are very different, then it's bound to end up with a situation where we just produce different things. If our inference came, so the issue comes then, we need to go, I guess, to intricacies of what philosophers and historians do. And I'm sure that there are differences. Otherwise, they would be the same profession. So they do things. But I guess the hope then, even if you find out those differences, you find a theory, you abstract them, and you see this is the Ruban way, historians' Ruban way of philosophers, that they are still able to agree about. But again, I mean, there's no really guarantee. And of course, if you are I mean, I don't think, because here is the aim is to integrate, but in some cases, of course, it can happen with communities that they rather split. You know, that's a Kuhnian evolutionary view of sciences. I don't think this is going to happen, but we need to find out the rules. That's my answer.
Thank you, you two. There are still 5 more minutes, so I'm going to take advantage of my role and I'm going to ask a question that is related to Andres's. So one concern that I have is that anybody, either philosopher or historian of science, would see also the scientific practice as being rule grounded or rule constrained, right?
Yeah.
And the idea is that the historian is going to analyze and identify and analyze those rules, and the philosopher is going to be able to explain them or to give us a more theoretical and more normative approach to whatever they are doing. The issue that I had, and that I think is connected to Andres, is that most of the time when we are inferring the rules, and it's connected to the grounds of your position, which is inferentialism, is that we are going to have many candidates for whatever happened there. And those candidates might not connect to one another, and we can have candidates that actually develop different rows of evolution, in a sense, that might correspond with the evidence. But still, the analysis that the historian would provide and the identification of those rules might not correspond with the one of the philosopher, because of this phenomenon, like this undetermination or something of the behavior of the scientific communities or the scientific individuals in particular. So do you have any way to escape this problem?
If I get you right, I'm not too worried about that situation. So you're saying that it would be a situation of underdetermination, as you said, and we have the same material of stuff, and then they reconstruct different accounts or maybe conflicting accounts of the same stuff or same episode or whatever that is. I don't think, and I'm not really wanting to have any deterministic, like algorithmic model of inferring what something is. Of course, the imperative must be that we tighten our ways of forming inferences and come to a better understanding how it happened and what is maybe not a legitimate way of inference, or maybe a worse account, or we have some criteria to rank between them. But other than that, I think we just have to live with the issue of underdetermination and resulting plurality, and that's just fine. So the only way that I hope that we keep as communities, we don't stop talking, we don't stop opening our accounts and the paths, that's the method paths, why we ended up, and maybe we are able to intervene and see where we disagree, and maybe, oh, this is idealistic, but persuade some others to change the route and come to another way. But I still believe that it's, again, Rothian thing, it's a matter of this discursive practices which will go on. As often in academic circles, there's a phrase used, we have not yet agreed, but I don't necessarily believe. I think, I don't know, it's well said that we should one day agree on everything. Maybe we just don't, but as long as we have a good ground game, rules for the good ground game, that's what I care.
Perfect. Many thanks, Giovanni. And please, audience, let's thank the speaker before moving to the next talk. And thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you.
It was
and
a wonderful talk.
Happy birthday. It's your birthday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So now we are ready for the next one. And I think, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing your name right. Zainab? Is that
yes.
Okay? Okay, so can you share your screen? Have you been allowed to share your screen?
I guess I'm sharing it now. Can you see my screen?
Yes. We can see it.